So whether it is that, what would you guys say is the reasoning on why someone should choose Christianity?
Well, people choose to follow Christianity for a whole host of reasons. The problem is the rationale being employed to justify those reasons is, for lack of a better term, bad.
The intellectual that I find most convincing is just about all scholars throughout our nation believe that Jesus was a historical figure, that he actually existed.
Yeah, there's no logical issue with that. In fact, as is often the case with most legendary figures, there's generally some truth behind them. But just because it is logically possible and highly probable that an itinerant, megalomaniacal first-century Jewish preacher started an offshoot cult by teaching what was considered heresy at the time and was summarily executed for his troubles doesn't logically entail that he was also supernatural in nature. And for those who are convinced that it is entailed by that logic, Hercules capturing Cerberus and Homer's The Odyssey would be historical events.
The vast majority believe that he claimed to be God.
In reality, whether or not the character in the Bible actually claims this is hotly debated. While a lot of people do interpret John 10:30 as Jesus making this statement, virtually all biblical scholarship does not hold to that interpretation, considering it a later theological development. So, were believers actually intellectually honest about the views of their own religion, they would understand that the reason their denominations interpret the Bible in this fashion is just so they can justify their various biases.
So, that claim right there, if he truly claimed it.
Right. If the individual truly claimed it. That if is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
Well, someone who claims to be God, I find in psych units because they're schizophrenic.
Right.
So you're admitting that there is a break in your epistemology. Good for you. Acknowledging you have a problem is the first step towards fixing it.
Right.
So do you truly believe that a schizophrenic converted 35% of the world, that he was truly God?
But that's just it. The individual didn't convince 35% of the world of anything. According to the story, at best, he maybe convinced a few dozen. Everyone else around him pretty much thought he was full of shit. You seem to be completely forgetting that Christianity slowly attained its stranglehold on the West thanks in part to the efforts of the Roman Empire. During the Pax Romana, a roughly 200-year period of peace and stability within the empire, the vastness of the empire's established infrastructure and its political stability facilitated the spread of Christianity through missionaries and trade routes. And when the empire adopted Christianity as its official religion, which in turn greatly accelerated its spread given that conversion often came at the tip of a sword, then you've got the perfect foundation for the argument from popularity or bandwagon fallacy that you're committing here.
That's a hard time.
No, that's a bandwagon fallacy. And the reason you're articulating your inability to recognize the fallacy that you're committing as a hard time is just your personal incredulity and an appeal to emotion. You can't see how it could be otherwise, and you really dig how the idea makes you personally feel, neither of which are indicators of the truth of the proposition.
Then his sayings, his wisdom sayings, my goodness, the Sermon on the Mount.
Even if you could actually verify that that event took place and was not just a story in a book, lots of historical figures often said lots of interesting and inspiring things. Point of fact, it was these individuals' various musings and insights into various topics that often lead them to becoming historical figures. This is yet another appeal to emotion.
Robert Coles at Harvard said that all other ethical teachings are simply footnotes to the Sermon on the Mount.
While I will recognize Dr. Robert Coles' major contributions in the field of child psychiatry and in the humanities, despite the persistent rumor that he often fabricated quotes from dead sources for his many books, which, by the way, has actually led to the creation of a group of Coles scholars who engage in Coles apologetics. Yes, the man is that popular. But no matter how impeccable his medicinal credentials or how unimpeachable his character may be, why would I give a shit about the opinion of one Christian who is committing the exact same fallacy that you are here?
So it shows the power of how he lived, who he was, and what he said. Change the nation, change the world forever.
Well, it's the power of an idea, and human history is full of ideas that took root and spread like wildfire. Some of them truly positive, some of them truly horrifying. But just because some of the ideas within Christianity may have a positive utility does not logically entail that the God of that religion actually exists. And again, you have the Roman Empire to thank for that, not Christ.
We have more manuscript evidence that's closest to the time of when it actually happened than any other.
recorded within the same century is not really close to the event itself. And it's kind of expected that people who were recording history in the area where believers lived would record what the people living there believed in. It does not mean that the historians themselves were believers. Point of fact, the vast majority of them were not. Nor that just because people believed the stories to be true that they were in fact true. I point back to Hercules and Odysseus.
So all of the Gospels were written within the lifetime of these eyewitnesses, or people who knew eyewitnesses.
But you're failing to mention one somewhat critically important point here. It is traditionally held that Jesus was crucified somewhere between 30 and 33 CE. Mark is estimated to have been written in between 65 and 75 CE. Luke between 60 and 80 CE. Matthew between 80 and 90 CE, and John between 80 and 110 CE. But that these particular pieces were potentially written within the possible lifetimes of purported eyewitnesses doesn't mean that the anonymous authors themselves were eyewitnesses, that the authors themselves had any actual access to eyewitnesses, nor that the stories themselves had not been embellished or subject to interpolation within the subsequent decades of oral dissemination before committing them to papyrus. You're making all of those assumptions on your own because you need to in order to justify your original position.
Next is reliability of the Gospels.
Is that in spite of all the contradictions within the Gospels, or are you just ignoring them altogether?
And then lastly is the resurrection for me.
Well, the resurrection isn't considered a historical claim. It's a theological claim. There is a difference. And if you have to appeal to faith in order to justify your belief, then you may as well just cop to having no rational reason for believing.
So I'm just talking Christianity. I'm not talking evidence for God.
Probably for the best, because that conversation would go orders of magnitude worse for you.
Absolutely.
Evidence for the resurrection is exploding, man.
It isn't. It's still just a theological claim for which there exists no evidence beyond the source material, and belief in which is only justified through an appeal to magic and mystery.
I mean, there's new evidence that comes out every few months, it seems.
I kind of make a living checking this. There is no evidence of the resurrection beyond the initial claim. And given that you're citing no sources for this supposed evidence, I'm gonna take this as you're speaking hyperbolically. Likely because you know you can get away with it because you're having this discussion with a fellow cult member, I mean believer.
Gary Habermas, William Lane Craig.
Both of those guys, in full denial of the scholarship, do claim that the resurrection was a historical event. However, neither of them have ever presented any historical evidence that it was, and all they've ever presented are the same stories from the same historical sources recording what this small group of people in this small part of the world believed that all apologists eventually cite. That's it. Next time, if you want to provide a reason to believe that Christianity is true, try presenting some evidence that the God that you claim to exist actually exists. Because until you can, your worldview is still predicated upon you begging the question of the existence of the thing to do the thing that you think it did. Be safe, be excellent to each other. I'll see you next time.